We're on Daf Nun Ches, and we're going to begin approximately 10 lines down from the top. You'll see a line that starts with the word Lomar, and if you move towards the left, around 10 lines down from the top, you'll see that he quotes a section from the Mishnah. The Mishnah is on Daf Nun Gimel, Nosana Samole Berekon. And the Gemara understands now, at this point in the Havamina, that he's got two receptacles, two what's called mizrakos. He's got one mizrak that he puts inside another mizrak. And the Gemara is going to report a suffix of Rami Bar Chama, and we're going to try to be poshet that suffix from our Mishnah. Boy mine Rami Bar Chama mirav Chizda, iniach mizrak betoch mizrak, v'kibel bo sadam mahu. A mizrak is the receptacle in which you receive the dam. It's got a status of a klishares, and he places one mizrak inside a second mizrak, a smaller one inside a larger one. And he's holding on to the larger mizrak, and he's makabel the dam inside the inner, smaller mizrak. Do we say min b'mino chotetz? Meaning, even though both of these mizrakos are made of the exact same substance, that's called min b'mino, nevertheless, it's a chatzitza. And it means it separates between the dam and the outer mizrach. So the Kohen is actually holding on to the outer, larger mizrach.
I'm with you.
Oh. And the inner mizrach is now serving as a chatzitza, separating the dam that is in the inner mizrach from the Kohen who's being makabel the dam by holding on to the outer mizrach. Oh, eno chotzitz. Or should we say that since it's min b'mino, it's considered one object and it's not a chatzitza. The implication of the Gemara is that had it been min b'she'eno mino, then clearly it would be a chatzitza, and it would be invalid. And Tosas Divrei Maskal min on the bottom of Nun Ches Amud Aleph is bothered by this because the Gemara in Masechet Sukkah seems to assume, quote, lekicha yidei davar acher shmei lekicha, which means that if I grab a hold of the lulav with something in between my hand and the lulav, then that's fine. That's a fulfillment of the pasuk ulekachtem lachem. And here in our case of Kabbalah Saddam, the Torah says v'lokach hakohen, and therefore the rules that govern lekicha in lulav should apply here equally to the case of Kabbalah Saddam. And Tosas makes a chiluk in his answer between a beis yad and something that's not a beis yad, meaning if he uses an object to pick up the lulav, it becomes like a beis yad. It's an extension of his hand. But here, he's holding the outer mizrach, and he's not using the inner mizrach in any sense as a beis yad. Amalei, Rav Chizda responds to Rami Bar Chama, T'nisua. Let's look at our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says that after he pours the dam of the par into the dam of the soyer, Nosanas Hamole Berekon, he pours them into another kli. My love, shouldn't we interpret the Mishnah as meaning that Hoshiv HaMizrak Mole Letoch Mizrak Rekon? He has one mizrak, one receptacle that's absolutely full with the dam of the par and the soyer, and then he places that inside an empty mizrak. And after he places the Mizrach Mole, he would put the dam on the Mizbeach. Now, the Torah says, "V'lakach midam hapor, midam hasoyer," and lakicha. This lakicha means that the Kohen is holding on to the Mizrach in which there's dam, but now he poured the dam from one Mizrach into the other Mizrach, and it would seem that that doesn't bother us at all. That the Mizrach on the outside is not a chatzitza. So the Gemara says, no, I'm going to reject that proof. That's not what the Mishnah has in mind. Here's the way we should interpret the Mishnah. Ira Mizrach Mole Letocha Mizrach Rekam. The Gemara adds the word Ira to clarify the meaning of the Mishnah. It's not that he has one Mizrach inside another Mizrach, but rather he's pouring from one Mizrach into another. So the Gemara immediately asks, Hatana le Reisha. We have in the Reisha of this same Mishnah, Ira Dama Par L'toch Dama Hasoyer. So why would the Mishnah repeat itself? What chiddush is the Mishnah adding? And the answer is, Kedei la'arvan yafa yafa. In other words, even though he poured it once, let's say the dam hapar, mixing it with the dam hasoyer, now he's going to take the dam hasoyer with the dam hapar in it and pour it back into the original Mizrach in order to make sure that the dam mixes very well. But as far as the original suffix is concerned, Tashma, let's answer your question based on a Mishnah in Masechet Zvachim on Daf Tesvav. The Mishnah says, Omeid al Gabi Kli. The halacha is that the feet of the Kohen Gadol, of any Kohen, have to be directly attached without any chatzitza to the Ritzbas HaZorah. And now the Kohen, at the time of his avodah, is standing on top of a utensil. That utensil is a chatzitza that separates his feet from the floor of the Azorah. Oh, here's another case of chatzitza. Al gabe regel chavero. One Kohen who's doing the avodah is standing on the feet or on one of the feet of his friend, of his colleague. Apostle. In this case, he's not standing directly. His feet are not attached to the Azorah, the Ritzvas Azorah. And the Gemara assumes that regel v'regel is one object, meaning it's all min echad. So we see that even in the case of min b'mino, when the Kohen is standing on the feet of another Kohen, that still constitutes a chatzitza. So we see that min b'mino is a chatzitza. And the Gemara rejects it by saying, shiny regel delo motzi mavtile. There's no way that you could consider the regel of the other Kohen, who's directly connected to the Azorah, as if it's one with the regel of the Kohen who's standing and doing the avodah, standing on top of the regel of his colleague. And if we cannot consider them as one regel, then it's called a chatzitza, it's called davar acher. Whereas in the case of the Mizrach, it could be that the Mizrach on the outside is considered one with the Mizrach on the inside. In the case of a regel of a Kohen, he's going to move around. He's a free agent. You can't bind him, to one spot, and therefore cannot be considered one object with the regel of the Kohen over. Ikad Diamri. Now the Gemara presents another version of Rami Bar Choma's Safek, and Hachi Kami Boile. This is what he asked. It was not an issue of chatzitza. In fact, at this point, the Ikad Diamri min b'mino eno chotzitz. But derech sheres b'kach or ein derech sheres b'kach. In a case where he took two different utensils, two different mizrakos, even though technically there's no chatzitza because it's min b'mino, but nevertheless it's not considered derech sheres. This is not considered the way a person would do the avoda in the mikdash in the normal mechubatik way. Tashma de Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel. And in this brisa of Rabbi Shmuel, we darshan a pasuk at the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar. It says, "V'lakchu es kol klei hashareis." Notice that klei hashareis is in the plural. asher yisharsu bam bakodesh. Now, the word hashares is in the singular. The word clay is in the plural. And it's, how do we reconcile that? It's coming to teach us that Shnei Kelim, Sheres Achas, that the word Shnayim means he's using two different utensils, but it's considered in the singular one Sheres, which means that you could do in the Mikdash and Avoda with two Kelim, and that's considered Derech Sheres. Now we have another suffix of Rami Bar Choma, asking Rav Chisda, boy Rav, Hiniach Siv. Siv in the Hebrew is called a tzemach, some vegetation, rach, it's very soft. Hagadol sviv hadekel, it surrounds the bark of a palm tree. And he takes this siv, bitoch hamizrak, and he puts it inside this receptacle, the kibbutz bos hadam. And now we have to know, Mahu, is this sieve a chatzitza between the dam and the mizrach? Shall we say min b'sheinu mino chotzitz? For sure it's a chatzitza because it's not the same min as the mizrach. Oh, eno chotzitz, why not? What's the logic to say that this is not a chatzitza? Keva de mechalchel. Mechalchel in the Hebrew is sofeg es hadam. Sofeg means it absorbs the blood. It's very thin. It's not a hard substance. So the dam is mechalchel, it goes through the sieve into the mizrach. And therefore the dam is considered as if it's sitting inside the mizrach, is lo chayetz, there's no chatzitzo, dilma lo shnosh. We say, no, we're not going to differentiate between a sieve, even though it's very soft and porous, and it absorbs the dam in such a way that the dam can now go below it, but rather the sieve is a chatzitza. It separates the dam from the bottom of the mizrach, and therefore there was no kabbalah sadam in the mizrach. Of the response to Rabbi Bar Choma Tanina, we learned in a Mishnah in Masechet Para, and the Mishnah is addressing the issue of Efer Para Duma, which has to be placed into Mayim, and that Mayim has to be what's called Mayim Chaim. It's flowing water. And what he places inside here is called a shokes. What is a shokes? So the water from the mayan is entering into a shokes. A shokes is an even. It's a stone, chalula, but it's very porous. And he puts it on the very boundary, what's called the sfas hamayon. So the water goes into this shokes, and through the porous holes, derech achar, in the walls of the shokes, and the shokes now is like a kli, and the water is now absorbed, safug, inside the shokes, and the mayim that's absorbed cannot be kosher fazah. We need water that's in a kli, and the water has to touch the kli itself. So the mayim, the water that is absorbed inside this shokes, is not munach b'kli, because a stone is not a kli. It's a sfog, it's not a kli. But all the other water that's located in the shokes, meaning that is outside the shokes itself, is kosher lahazah. And zolef v'holech ad shemagil isfog. He can draw the water from the shokes until he reaches the sfog itself. So we see clearly from this Mishnah that all the water is considered inside the kli, except for the water that's mamish inside the sfog, inside the shokes. but the rest of the water is considered as if it's munach b'kli. Now the sfog itself should be a chatzitza between the mayim and the kli, but the answer is it's not a chatzitza because the water is machalchalim b'sfog. It goes through the sfog and it goes into the kli. And therefore, we should, by analogy, derive the conclusion that a sieve that's put inside a mizrach is not a chatzitza because the sieve, like the sfog, is porous, it's soft, and the water, and in this case, the blood, goes through the sieve into the kli. The Gemara rejects it. Shani maya de klisha. You can't compare water to blood. Water is very thin, and it seeps through this shokes, and it ends up on the kli. But in the case of dam is very thick, and it's not so machalchel. It doesn't go through the pores like water does, and therefore we should assume that perhaps the sieve is indeed a chatzitza between the dam and the mizrach. Ika diamri, according to another interpretation, hachi poshet le. Here's the answer that Rav Chizda gave to the suffix of Rami Bar Choma. B'dam kosher. As far as Kabbalas Hadam in this second lishna, in this second transmission, the dam for Kabbalas Hadam that goes through the sieve is kshera. And we're going to assume that the dam is machalchel, it pierces through all the sides of the sieve and it gets to the mizrach. It's not a chatzitza. However, bekometz posel. With regard to menachos, there's a requirement of kmitza. And what happens is that after the kohen does the kmitza and he has the kometz in his hand, he now has to take it and put it into a kli. And that kli is a kli sharis that's makadesh the kometz. But in this case, inside the kli, there's a sieve. There is this this vegetable, if we call it that, from the bottom of a palm tree, and it's very porous. And the Gemara is establishing that there's no successful kiddush to sanctify the kometz, and the reason for that is because a mincha is dry, it is flour, and it doesn't get absorbed into the sieve, right? If you have a liquid substance, then it could go through the pores of the sieve and enter into the kli, but not in the case of soles, of the refined flour, because it's considered a dry substance and it's not in any way absorbed in the sieve, such that now the sieve could pass it on over to the kli itself. There was no kiddush kli, and therefore the kometz is not sanctified, and it cannot be used for a mincha.